Now, where we left off, Jesus has been kind of zigzagging, crossing from side to side over the Sea of Galilee, mostly in that northeastern area where Bethsaida was located, and up and down the western shore of the lake in areas of Gennesaret and Capernaum. Now, he's been ministering to and staying close with on the heels of ministering to mostly Jewish folks, a Jewish audience. And we read in the first part of the chapter that he was challenged yet again by the religious leaders. And he's beginning, they're turning up the heat on him, tightening the screws on him. And they're challenging him, and they're opposing him. Regardless of what magnificent miracles he does, regardless of the scriptural justification that he presents. And so now moving forward, it's as if Jesus is kind of veering from his constant trajectory of ministering to the Jewish people, his people, and begins to go into and venture into the predominantly Gentile territory and minister to the Gentile audience. That's kind of, we see this shift here in his ministry. Oh, he's not forsaking the Jews. He goes back to them. We'll see at the end of the chapter. But you'll see this, as you will see in the early church and how it came to be. First to the Jews and then to the outermost parts of the world, to the Greeks, to the Gentiles, right? So now, beginning in chapter 7, verse 24, we read that from there, he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and wanted no one to know, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and she fell at his feet. And the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So from the area of the Gennesaret in Galilee, Jesus left. He went some 50 miles to the northwest in what is the only recorded time that he left Palestine, and he went strictly into the Gentile territory. And so I think it's fitting that after Jesus tears down this distinction between clean and unclean food in so many ways, the stigma that was with that, as we remember last week, and we can recall last week about what made a man unclean and clean, that the wall between the Jews and the Gentiles, he begins to minister to the Gentiles as well. Kind of fitting that he follows this pattern in Mark, ministering to the Gospel of Mark, entitled or written originally for and toward the Roman, most people believe. So kind of ministering now to the Gentiles, which really is this work that Jesus begins to do, and then it culminates really at the cross when he dies on the cross. And Ephesians 2:11 tells us how his death on the cross breaks down that wall. Well, not only that wall between man and God in general, but that wall between Jew and Gentile, that wall that separates. Now, ideally, these Phoenician cities were a part of the realm of Israel, if you can recall. When under Joshua, the land was being partitioned out, the tribe of Asher was given the land. It says, as far as Great Sidon to the fortified city of Tyre, Joshua tells us in Joshua 19:28. They had never been able to subdue their territory. They had never really claimed it. As Barclay writes, where the might of arms was helpless, the conquering love of Jesus Christ was victorious. The earthly Israel had failed to gather in the people of Phoenicia. Now the true Israel had come upon them. It was not a strange land into which Jesus came. It was a land which long ago God had given to his own. He was not so much coming among strangers as entering into his inheritance, Barclay wrote. Well, the major work of the Gentiles is still the future, yet to come in the church. So he's taking it kind of slow to the heathens that were remaining, somewhat hidden behind closed doors initially. But he could not be hidden. Man, he comes into this area, into this region. He's inside the house. He's taking it slow. And he could not be hidden. And I thought, well, what application can be found there? I mean, church, this should be the way it is. That when you have Jesus in your house, man, you can't keep it secret, right? It's got to come out. And how you live and what you say, this distinct change that Jesus makes in us. Beautiful change, though. Not this stuffy Christian, rah, 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 rah. Your shrubs need to be trimmed kind of Christian to your neighbors. But this aching love, that you love those, that's Jesus cannot be hidden when he's in your house. And he couldn't be hidden from this woman who had this great need and no doubt heard about him. And we're told she comes in and she falls at his feet. She was a Greek woman by birth, a Syrian of the region of Phoenicia. And she comes to Jesus humbly, falling down at his feet. The wording suggests here that she's begging. Matthew tells us that it's almost disturbing. It's almost bugging them. Like, get rid of this woman. She's driving us crazy, right? Begging Jesus for help. And she was interceding for her daughter who was demon-possessed. What a horrible thing to witness. As I have 3 small boys, and I think when something happens to them where you're hopeless. I had Evan at 6 months old had pneumonia. And, pneumonia for a 6-month-old is never good. Spiking fevers and trying to put IV in a little, infant. You feel so hopeless and vulnerable when that happens with your child. Like, oh, man, I can see this woman tried everything. She's choked up. She's desperate, crying out. What a horrible thing. R.C. Ryle puts it this way. Her condition was such that no teacher could reach the mind, no medicine could heal the body, a condition only 1 degree better than death itself, being demon-possessed. And she's witnessing this day in and day out. But she believed that this Jesus of the Jews, that he had the remedy. Cast the demon out of my daughter, she cries. She kept begging. And she gets Jesus' attention and eventually his admiration. In verse 27, we read, but Jesus said to her, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. And she answered and said to him, yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. In verse 29, then he said to her, for this saying, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. Wow, what a heavy passage, Hard for us in our culture and our understanding to grab hold of and appreciate, I think. Let the little children be first, for it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Doesn't go so well in our vernacular today. Sounds pretty harsh without understanding and delineating first between the Greek words for dog, because we have dog is dog, kind of. I'll break it down a little bit. But we also don't have Jesus' tone. I tried to read it with some lovingness and dearness there. It's not good to throw it to the dogs. You know what I mean? It's not like there was some endearingness here that was going on that we miss. The word Jesus used was not this derogatory word for dog. In that day, the Gentiles had a word for dog that was like a vile, vicious creature dog, a wild dog, roaming the horizon, taking what they need by force. And they would refer to Gentiles like that because there were Jews, not all of them, but there were Jews who hated Gentiles. They were racist, and they thought that the Jews, and even rabbis would teach this, they thought that Gentiles were only good for stoking the flames of hell, And so, they had a derogatory term for them. We have one, it's the capital B-I, I'm not going to, the female dog. for dog. We use that as a derogatory. That's not what Jesus is referring to here. Instead, it's the equivalent of what we would say little puppy, right? It was more endearing. It would be like for one brother to the next saying, hey, dog. I never say it right. D-A-A-A-A-W-G. Oh, dog. You know, it was an endearing thing, you know, right? I have a little puppy. This guy's 6 months old, and I always think after we have one, why do we do this, right? And but she's great. She's a little mutt and growing faster than what she should be and what we were told we thought she was going to be, and had her spayed on Friday, you know, and but she's such a sweet little thing, you know. It's just a sweet little puppy. But there's so much more endearing than even that, because Rossi's still a dog in my home. This isn't what Jesus was saying. He was given a sense of priority here. That's what he was laying out. He was saying there was an order of priority. The Jews were offered the Messiah first. It was just the way it is. He called Abraham. He called them, and he through Abraham's people, he established a nation, and he gave them the oracles, the writings. The prophets came forth from them and promised of a Messiah. And they clung to him, albeit not always perfect, right? But they were his people. But it wasn't to be just for them. They were to be a light to the world, Isaiah says. A light to the world. But he would come to them first. And then he would move to the outskirts. When we read in Romans, it's almost as if there was, well, it declares a sense of jealousy there. It's provoked jealousy amongst my people. And the church moves forth. You'll see as Jesus goes out into the Gentile territories, but also Paul will. Paul and the apostles, they leave Jerusalem and they go into the city surrounding, and the first thing they do is they find a synagogue, and they go and they speak to the Jewish people, and sometimes they receive, most of the time they don't, and so then they end up leaving and going to the Gentiles. It's just a natural order of things, the gospel of God. It's powerful. We shouldn't be ashamed of it, Paul said. It's the gospel of Christ, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. It's just an order of things, and he's laying this out to her in a very loving and endearing way, I think, kind of drawing her faith. And her response, I believe, just blew the Lord's mind, just reached his heart, wins his heart. Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. We talk about this immense faith she had, because he wasn't prophesied in her prophecies of her people and her gods, that she was reaching out. The God of Israel, Yahweh, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Messiah was promised through them. Even the little dogs under the table they eat. She accepts this low place before Jesus, not debating whether or not that's fair or not. This isn't fair. And second, she asked Jesus to deal with her own level, where she was at. Yeah, okay, here I am. Will you minister to me even as someone who's second down the list, right? Less of a priority. And Jesus does this miracle, and I love this because, you know, Jesus does all kinds of things when he answers prayers, when he reaches out. I mean, sometimes he touches someone. Sometimes people touch him, we've seen, and they're healed. Sometimes he says the word, right? And then it's done. He doesn't even say anything. You notice that? There's nothing, you know, it's done as you said. He just thought it, you know? Demon be gone in his head. And it was gone, right? He just thought it. For saying this, go your way, the demon's gone out of your daughter. That's how easy it was for him. And then in verse 30, we're told she goes back and she finds her daughter resting. You know, it's a beautiful picture. Symbolically, this woman stands for the Gentile world, which so eagerly seized on the bread of heaven, which the Jews rejected and threw away. They clamored to, the Gentiles did. Here we are, the byproduct of it. Most of us, Gentiles in this room. On the outermost parts of the world. In verse 31, again now, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. And then he brought to him one who was deaf, who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hands on him. Verse 33, he took him aside from the multitude, put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be open. Immediately, his ears were opened, and his impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should go and tell no one. But the more he commanded them, the more widely it was proclaimed. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all of this well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So Jesus leaves Tyre and Sidon, this predominantly Gentile area. He doesn't head back to Galilee. He doesn't head back amongst his people. Instead, he heads south, kind of skirts the eastern Sea of Galilee to another Gentile region known as Decapolis, which means the 10 cities. And we have yet this another intercession being made. The people, they bring to him this deaf man who had this impediment. He couldn't speak, or couldn't speak well. And what Jesus does to this man, you can't help but scratch your head, right? And go, what the heck? Oh, wow, okay. He took him aside. He put his fingers in his ears. You know the disciples are taking notes, right? Put his fingers in his ears. He spat and touched his tongue. So I don't know if he went, I told him to stick his tongue out. How he did it, did he get really close? I just try to imagine this whole thing, and it's an interesting scene, And he sighed, this sigh, be opened, right? Notice Jesus never follows the same pattern. I love that. I love that. It kills my flesh. My flesh hates that. It loves methodology. It loves to, take notes and do the same thing. Hey, this church did that, so let's duplicate exactly what this church does over there. That's our method, right? It's our marketing strategy. Does it work? Yeah, it works. At surface level, it works, right? But Jesus is just never setting some sort of pattern. Doesn't seem to have a methodology. So people can't mimic his moves for better success. And there's a sigh he gives out. It's a sigh of compassion when you hurt for someone, when you see them in their predicament. I've been in the hospital room when someone's dying, and I just, you can't help but just be moved by it. When there's a child who's suffering, you just can't help but just, it's Jesus sighing in this moment, with this predicament. He's seen lots of deaf, blind, crippled folks. But something about this man, he's moved with compassion for. In verse 35, immediately his ears were open, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. But I think what I love most about this is Jesus is such a personal God. He's so personal with this man, with us. Everyone, we're going to do something unique for you, right? Because you're a unique person. He meets all of us right where we are. Each of us with our different predicaments, our unique situations, our hurts, our defeats. Isn't that beautiful? That he knows each of us, he singles us out, he deals with us so differently. And the multitudes, they were watching this happen. He singled them out from the multitudes and kind of walked away with him and kind of gave him this personal attention, as I believe he does with all of us. And the multitudes, they were astonished beyond measure, we're told, saying, he has done all things well. Matthew 15, the parallel account in verse 31 says that they all glorified the God of Israel. I think that's kind of key too. These are Gentiles. And I'm just saying praise God, because that could be a million gods, right? But they are praising the God of Israel. They saw something so amazing in Jesus that the God of Israel, the God of Yahweh was elevated. Not a church. Church wasn't elevated. Not the disciples. They weren't elevated. Not even Jesus, the instrument of this miracle, Yahweh, was elevated, who we know is also God. Powerful what goes on here, that these Gentiles are recognizing the God of Israel because of this one miracle. And we're told in chapter 8, verse 1, that moving on, that in those days, the multitudes being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own homes, they'll faint on the way, for some of them have come so far. Then his disciples, they answered him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have? Right then should have been a key, right? And they said, 7. And so he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them and gave them to the disciples, set them before them, and they set them before the multitude. In verse 7, they also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to them he set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. So we're still in a place known as Decapolis. It's a Gentile region on the southeastern side of the Sea of Galilee. And now there are thousands of people making up the multitudes. I mean, we're no 4,000 Gentile men here, probably more than that with women and children. They always kind of gave the men credence there and not really count everyone else in that day and that time. And so we have these Gentile multitudes. But where did these Gentiles come from? Where did they come from? How did they hear about Jesus? I mean, let me submit to you, it was more than just a deaf, mute healing that drew these crowds. I mean, can you remember the last time that Jesus was in this region? The last time he was in this area? And we saw it in chapter 5, that he had come ashore, and there was a demoniac man that he had set free. This man was famous, popular. I mean, no one could contain him. They could put chains on him. They couldn't subdue him. They pretty much ran him out of town, and he was left kind of hanging out in the graves and the tombs out in the countryside. And he was cutting himself and screaming at night. And I mean, yeah, everyone knew who this guy was, right? And here Jesus cast the demons out of him. Legion, they go into the pigs. The pigs go run off into the water, and they all die. And what happened from that point? From that point, the people of the region said, get out of here. Pack your bags, get back in the boat, and get out of here. We want nothing to do with you. They kind of ran him off. But the one guy he would set free, he wanted to go with them. He's like, yeah, they're kicking you out. We want to go. Like, can I go with you, you know? And Jesus said, no, you can't go with me. I want you to do what? And I want you to go. I want you to go back and tell your family. I want you to go back and tell the people what great things the Lord has done for you. Go to your home, he says. And so he, we're told, departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. I mean, I'm just saying, it may not have been him, but that's a powerful testimony with that dude, right? And everyone kind of heard about it. And the next thing you know, there's people gathering. And they're not gathering because they're still mad about the pigs. Man, they've heard about this man coming. They're coming to check Jesus out. A couple of weeks ago, we read where Jesus was somewhere along the Sea of Gennesaret in the western Galilean shore. The multitudes were there. They were waiting for him, and he taught them until it was late. And then he was moved with compassion for them. And he said they were like sheep having no shepherd, we're told. And he fed them, a crowd of 5,000 Jewish men. Could have been 10,000 plus with women and children. But now he crosses over the lake, and there's this crowd of 4,000 Gentiles. They're gathered again, and Jesus again is moved with compassion on them. Because this time, not because they had no shepherd, but because these guys had stayed with him for 3 days, and they were hungry. Man, I believe that he was amazed with this. These aren't even my people. They haven't heard the prophecies. They haven't heard all the things. They wasn't promised these things, and yet here I come, and they're listening. They're hearing me out. They're gathered around. He's just amazed with their faith. Now, I don't know how many conferences you've been to, but how many conferences have you gone in the middle of nowhere where there's no lodging and they don't feed you, and you hang out for 3 days hearing what the dude has to say? Not many conferences like that. We're gone after the snack time. What? No sandwiches for lunch? We're out of there. But 3 days they were hanging out with, and he's moved. He's been teaching them. He was concerned for their well-being. Man, isn't it a beautiful thing that our God is so concerned with even the small little minutia of our life? Man, he's worried that they're going to faint. They're big boys. Can't they handle themselves? But he's concerned with their well-being. He didn't want to see them faint on the way home. And this time, he doesn't even ask his disciples. Read closely. He doesn't really even ask his disciples, what should we do? What's the plan, guys? He's just making this compassionate observation. He's kind of thinking out loud. He's looking at the multitudes. He's going, oh, what are we going to do? He didn't say that because he knew what he was going to do. He's like, oh, the people, they're going to faint. They're going to go their own way. And, we're going to feed these. We got to feed these guys. Right? Making this compassionate observation. Maybe he was throwing it out there to his disciples. Hey, guys, here's your chance. Peter, you always want to step up and say the right thing. Here's your chance. Wanting them maybe to say, okay, Lord, let's do that thing, right? Let's gather the bread. Let's gather the bread. Remember, let's gather the bread. Get the fish, get the bread. Let's do that multiply thing. Maybe that's what he was wanting to do. He was stirring in them for their reply to say, hey, not long ago you just fed way more than this with 5 loaves. Hey, a couple of fish. Let's do it again. And their response instead was in verse 4, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? And Jesus, no doubt, hoped that they would regard his past faithfulness as a promise to meet their present need. I think you can go on multiple levels here, too, that really there was no bread in the wilderness that satisfies because it comes in one moment, it's gone the next, like the manna from heaven. But Jesus was that bread that never will leave you unsatisfied for eternity, right? I get that. There's a deeper element here. But he's drawing his disciples. He's pouring into these guys. He's teaching them. He's showing them. He's really concerned about them. We'll see that in just a second, moving into the next passage. But so they gathered together their 7 loaves and the bread and a few small fish or a few fish and had the people sit in groups, and he prayed over them. He broke it and he gave it to his disciples, and they distributed it. Okay, so another amazing miracle taking place. They ate, they were filled, they took 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. And the word for basket here is different from the one collected the leftovers in the feeding of the 5,000 over on the other side of the sea, which was a small basket, the Greek word. This one refers to a basket the Gentiles would have used, which was large. It's like a hamper size. We also find it in Acts chapter 9, verse 25, when they lowered Paul down from the Damascus wall. He was in a basket like this, large enough to put the Apostle Paul in. And they talk about some big doggy bags of leftovers that they had. All this, how much bread can get in 7 hampers? It's a lot of bread left over, which they started with very few. That's a miracle. But what a powerful way to come back to this region, right? The last time he was there, he offended them. Did a good deed. He healed a demoniac man or 2. So we see the other gospel account. But then they run him away. Get out of here. Yeah, you're hurting our livelihood, right? It's like, it's not like he's trying to pay them back, but he's blessing them, The powerful way to reveal the Lord's love. Hey, I'm moved. He didn't have to feed them. They're big boys again. They could go away and eat, but he fed them. And he did it in a discreet fashion. Again, not a David Blaine style, right? Everyone draw near. Watch this bread as it multiplies in my hand. I put it in my pants. Oh, maybe bad analogy. Put it in my shirt. Comes out too. Watch. And everyone's amazed. And no, he didn't do that. It was very discreet how he blessed it. He broke it. He gave it out and drew no attention to himself. But the miracle of God was done in the midst. He came to satisfy the Jewish and the Gentile hunger alike. That in him, in truth, was the God who opens his hand and satisfies the desires of everything. What an amazing God we serve. Immediately after this, gets into the boat with his disciples, and he came to the region of Dalmanutha. Now, no one is quite positive where this is. Matthew refers to it as Magdala. But most scholars believe that somewhere in the northwestern region of the Galilean shore, closer to his home base of operation, Capernaum. It's speculation, but somewhere in that region. And we read in verse 11 that then the Pharisees, that they came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation." So Jesus, he leaves the Gentiles. Right? He goes back into his Jewish territory, closer to home, and the love and the warmth of the religious leaders, they're waiting for him. Disputing with him, testing him, seeking a sign. Give us a sign from heaven. As if he hasn't done enough. Mark's pretty polite in his rendering here. It says that he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation." But Matthew chapter 16, parallel account, shares a bit more. It's a little more prickly in Matthew's account. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. The sign, the prophet Jonah, that he was in the belly of the whale for 3 days, and then that Jesus would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days, killed, essentially, and then rise again. That's the only sign they're going to get, right? Which is a pretty powerful sign, if you ask me. But Jesus, he let out a sigh. He let out a sigh of compassion earlier. He was moved, but this isn't the sigh of compassion. It's disgust, grieving of the spirit. The next generation, what they're going to see. And I believe that sigh of disgust could be mixed with compassion as he'll later look out over Jerusalem and weep, knowing that terrible things are going to happen, their unbelief. And next we find he uses this engagement with these Pharisees, this embroiled kind of debate, or rather confrontation with the religious leaders and disciples. He uses it to warn his disciples regarding these religious snakes. So we read in chapter 8, verse 13, that he left them. He left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. And then he charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "Is it because we have no bread?" In verse 17, Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? And then I broke the 5, when he broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, when I did that, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said 7. He said in verse 21, so how is it that you do not understand? So Jesus and the men are now heading back across the Sea of Galilee, heading toward the area of Bethsaida. And they realize they only have 1 loaf of bread with them. It's a guy thing. We always know what our food source is, And they're kind of, we got 1 loaf of bread, I'm wondering, how is that possible? Because there's a lot of bread they had left over. Where did it go? I don't know, but it's gone. They don't have it. Maybe they forgot it. Maybe that's what they're arguing over. You didn't grab the baskets? No, I just got this 1 loaf. What? I don't know. I'm speculating. It's not in the Bible, guys. But there, as enough the tension was drawn to that there was only 1 loaf of bread, it's possible that they were arguing, and Jesus was taking advantage of this, the true Jesus fashion, right? Taking what's going on around him and using it as an object lesson to teach them something of spiritual nature and spiritual truth. 2 major lessons he shares here. First, it's because we have no bread. Is that why he's saying this? They were consumed with their earthly temporal needs. I think this was a frustration Jesus had with everybody. As I gave you chapter John to study a couple of weeks ago, parallel account of right after feeding the 5,000. The people, they weren't satisfied because bread just doesn't satisfy. It's over with in no time, and you need more. And he was offering them much more, right? So yeah, there's a frustration in there. And he wanted to go deeper with his disciples. The Jews often referred to leaven as sin because of the very property and process it causes fermentation, rot, or breakdown. That's the essence, really, when you think about it, of sin. It's rot, it's breakdown. It's just a little bit. All it takes is just a little bit, and it begins to rise and to break down. You don't need a lot. Beware of the leaven. Leaven, that yeast that causes rising, that fermentation process. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Leaven in those days would be in a lump, and how they made bread in that culture, in that time. It would be in the lump of bread, and then they would knead it out, right? And then before they would cook it, they would pinch off a little bit that had the yeast in it and pull it aside, and they would put it in the next, and then so on and so forth, and it just kind of keeps going that way. And they would put it in the lump, and just that little bit of yeast in a matter of time would move through, the fermentation process would move through all the dough and cause it to rise, gas kind of releasing. And so it didn't take very much. It was a perfect illustration of sin, the sin of pride. The presence of a little can corrupt a large amount. And Jesus is warning them after engaging with these religious leaders. Take heed. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Here, Jesus warns them concerning 2 different kinds of leaven. Matthew chapter 16 clearly lets us know that he was referring to their doctrine, their teachings. Matthew throws in a third leaven, the Sadducees. And the leaven of the Pharisees refers to this legalism, self-righteous attempts to righteousness. The leaven of Herod most likely refers to the Herodians, who were trying to bring about righteousness by and through political gain, political means and maneuvering. And a third one Matthew includes was the leaven of the Sadducees, who embraced really this liberal theology, liberal doctrine and teaching. And I thought about this, and I thought, wow, today, despite Jesus' warnings, Despite Jesus' warnings and further warnings in the epistles on all three of these things, the church is still entertaining and including these three leavens in the lump. And it's true, we may rise up. We may taste good, the little leaven, right? To the outside world kind of looking in. But ultimately, we're handicapped. We're handicapped and stifled in sharing the gospel message of Jesus Christ. So beware of trusting in and leaning on also the leaven of the Herodians. Leaning on and depending on political people to make things happen for us. Politics. Oh, we have a responsibility to vote and to vote according to biblical principles. But by putting our trust and our faith in politics to move forth the gospel, we're no different than the Herodians, and it's very leavenous. It's not a word, I made it up, but I'll go with it. Or do-it-yourself approaches. Like the Pharisees, these self-righteous approaches, holding up righteousness for righteousness' sake alone, having no love and no mercy. Always looking down at everyone else, like we're the elitists. We got it all figured out. Oh, you don't use that translation. Oh. And so on and so forth. And finally, compromising our truths and principles of God's word. The commandments of God, as he was dealing with last week. Holding traditions of men up higher than the traditions of God. And also mixing in the things of the world into the church in order to gain the world. This liberal theology that we have to be like them more and more and more. Man, we can be relevant to them without compromising our faith. Right? I thought about this and I was like, oh, well, we're not any of those because we're the perfect church here. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. We all deal with it in our own mindset. I thought, Randy, watch out. Because we're fully capable of going the direction of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Herodians in our attempts to the gospel. It was a warning. It was a warning for me. I'm just passing it on to you guys. Secondarily, the second lesson that he shares with his disciples, kind of seizing on this opportunity, it's really simple. Do you not yet perceive nor understand? I mean, Jesus confronted his disciples over their lack of understanding. So we get the idea that they kind of dropped the ball, not understanding when they should have, right? I mean, they should have seen, hey, he just fed 5,000 or 10,000 if you include everyone, just not long ago. You know, should have seen his past faithfulness. They kind of dropped the ball. They couldn't understand. And really, it leads to this hard-heartedness that they had. This is an interesting, different hard-heartedness, isn't it? He's concerned about their hard-heartedness and misunderstanding, not perceiving, not understanding, and yet they're not bitter and vile like the hard-heartedness that we see. They're lacking understanding because of hardness of heart. So often my heart is hardened because of my lack of belief and trusting in the Lord and pressing into him and not remembering. Do you not remember? Do you not remember, he said? Their understanding should have been based on seeing what Jesus had already done. We can always take the past faithfulness of God as a promise for his continued love and grace, his care. His past faithfulness should warrant our present trust. Have you heard that today? Good. This is one of those situations where we wish we could kind of record Jesus' words and hear his tone in this to get a better understanding. But I'm almost positive it was communicated out of love. So he loved these men as he confronted them. He loved them. Hear and do you not hear? See and do you not see? And now the last passage of Scripture that we'll cover before I let you go. Verse 22. And all this ties together really beautifully. We'll see in a sec. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him, and and he begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of town. And when he had spit in his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Verse 25, then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everything clearly. And then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in town. And so, again, we see Jesus ministering to someone that's been brought before him, someone making intercession, bringing this man to them. The disciples, they reach this northeastern side of the lake. They're making their way up into Bethsaida, and they bring this guy to him. He's just getting in the city, and then what does Jesus do? He leads them out of the town, just like he did the deaf man, kind of led him away from the crowd. Now he's leading this man away from the town. I think this was probably, this one was one of the most unique miracles that Jesus did. I mean, actually, both of them, this one and the one we looked at earlier with the deaf mute man, are the most interesting and unique healings. I'm not alone amongst those that believe this beautiful connection, object lesson that's here with his teaching to the disciples and these two miracles that kind of sandwich it. Jesus led both of them away from public attention. Jesus always, he would teach and then he would get alone with his disciples and he would minister to them and giving them special kind of attention. Jesus gives hearing and sight to men. Likewise, opens the spiritual ears of his own so that they may hear, they may see with spiritual eyes and ears. And Jesus, he questions his disciples very frustratingly, I believe, saying, having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? I just healed a deaf, mute man, now a blind man, The last concerning this blind man, it was a process. I want you to dial in. I know I've been long. I know that you did a lot of things I've said, but I want you to dial into this. Pay attention. The last thing concerning this blind man, it was a process to bring full healing. As it was for the men that he's ministering to, the disciples, as it is for us at times, a process that he's going through. He had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him. Now, what book would he get that from? Isn't this a crazy method? If Jesus would have done this today, he would have been sued. But weren't you healed, sir? Yes, but the hygiene was the question. Adam Clark says this. It's an interesting perspective, that it's likely that this was done merely to separate the eyelids. In certain cases of blindness, they're found gummed together. It required a miracle to restore the sight. And this was done in consequence of Christ having laid hands upon the blind man. It required no miracle to separate the eyelids, and therefore natural means were employed. This was done by rubbing them with his spittle. Thought, okay, Adam, it's interesting to think about. When you see men like trees, he said, he rubs his eyes, and the man says, I see men as trees. So he looked up. And then he restored and saw everything clearly. And this was the only miracle that took place gradually in phase. Now, I take great comfort in this. So should you. Because more often than not, Jesus, he touches us in similar ways. Can he heal immediately? Can he change us immediately. Yes, he can, and there's evidence of that and testimonies of that. But more times than not, Jesus touches us in this fashion. Jesus touches us in this similar way. For some reason, we are led to believe that we must have Maserati faith and not Honda Civic faith. Maserati faith makes things happen now, immediately. But the reality is that most of us cry out with Honda Civic faith. Talking the bottom of the line model. But like leaven, the scripture says a little dab will do you. Right? You don't need a lot of faith, the faith of a mustard seed. The Lord ministers to us in such a powerful ways, often progressively in nature and not all at once. I want to challenge you with that. I'm going to ask the worship team